Yeah, but I mean,
itself.
think it out, Copeland. Mr. Copeland.
All right,
really.
you have in the British service here, to speak of the British, not just concentrate on America, you've got people who speak Russian without an accent, who speak Czech without an accent, who speak Polish. They know the difference in every little party and the Christian Democratic Party, the Democratic Christian Party, whatever, in any country in the world. They have that intelligence there. But they might have some little bureaucrat down who actually wrote that report, who will do something stupid.
You have buffoons.
Well, I tell you why I know they're ignorant, because they think that if you're a member
Who's
of the
they?
Labour
When you
Party
say
or a
they,
trade unionist, you're trying to destroy democracy. That couldn't be more ignorant than that.
Just may be.
Or they think that Harold Wilson was a Soviet agent. I mean,
Harold Wilson had
serious.
good relations with the CIA, very good relations with a man named Chet Cooper, who was here at the time. He had very good relations. He went back to the States when he thought that the MI5 was bugging his phone. He got a very healthy reception from Jim Angleton and among other people like there. But these stories they've got out of hand. And what we're hearing this evening is a lot of exaggerations, a lot of proceeding from the specific to the general when it really isn't justified.
And you're talking about moral black and whites, and what we're really discussing here is the moral twilight zone. And that's what makes it interesting, and it's also what makes
But
it
may I just put this to you?
problematic.
If you have a security service protected from reality, not only do the public not know what they do, but they don't know what's going on outside.
I mean, they have wives, they have children, they have mothers. They don't live in a sort of vacuum far away from
the enemy
everyone.
within. For example, in '73, there was a briefing given. I know this from officials in the Department of Industry, where I was the just made Secretary of State. They gave a complete briefing that the real danger was the enemy within and not the Russians. And '73 confirms what Mr. Copeland said, that nobody's really thought of a nuclear war. And I do think that the whole of our security services now are designed to prevent social change in Britain, even by parliamentary means. And that is a very, very dangerous position to be in. That's all I'm saying, no more than that.
It's a profoundly cynical...
I think it's an interesting point that James Rusbridge was saying there, because he completely disagreeing with you. So you're saying they don't live in a vacuum. And James, you were saying they do.
I mean, I think anyone who works in the intelligence service for more than about 10 years is crazy.
How many people have you
How long
done
did you work?
I never worked with, fortunately, I only worked with them, but a lot of the people I met I thought were very strange. And
You must not have known very many. I've known some strange ones too. But
we think you're very nice, Mr. Copeland. But, no,
I want you to think it's good job.
I mean,
that's not
turkeys
a
don't...
Were you paying me a compliment?
Now, Mr. Copeland,
But he's
turkeys
scared
don't
of being
vote-
assassinated.
turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And the intelligence services are never going to tell us that there isn't any work for them to do. And they're always going to invent new windmills to tilt
Now,
at.
you got a point there.
And they will always come along and tell you, look out, there's a bogeyman around the corner, so we better tighten up, we need more technology. And then you say, well, did you catch those spies? And they say, well, we're afraid we didn't actually catch the spies. Yeah, it has been spying for 16 years. Or the Walker trio went on spying very happily for 16, 17 years. Prime was spying in GCHQ, Philby was spying. And afterwards, everyone's got excuses. And when they run out of excuses, they say, I know the reason. Hollis was a spy. The chap at the top was a spy. That was how it all went wrong.
You're a better man, James.
I'm
All
Say,
we're
look, let
doing
me make
here
a
is...
point here. I want to know what Tony Benn thinks of this. I want to know what Tony Benn thinks of this. If we were 1,000 people dropped on a desert island, okay? Miscellaneous, all that else. We would divide up according to the problems. We'd have somebody picking up wood, we'd have somebody building huts, we'd somebody carrying berries, and so forth. Problems come first, solutions come after. But once you have a big government, you have the solutions first, and every national problem that comes up, each department defines that problem in terms of what solution it happens to have. Now, this happened to the CIA. When we were under Harry Truman, we had one job only, is to get onto his desk what he needed to know what the problems internationally were and what information he needed to make the decisions with regard to solving them. But then we got in the business of covert operations and Department of Dirty Tricks and things of that sort that we were supposed to do. And then, from that day on, our intelligence was geared to proving that we needed dirty tricks. We needed all these things. And you know why? It's because the more we argued for it, the bigger our budget got.
Sure.
Meanwhile, we're fighting the budget of the military. They're trying to get a bigger budget. We had 3 departments then, not just one. And the Army wanted more for the Army because they said, look, last down, all wars are foreign ground. The Navy said, McMahon, McKinda, the sea is the last thing. And then the Air was saying, nonsense, it's going to be missiles. So everybody fighting for bigger budget. Because...
What was the worst dirty trick that the CIA undertook that you can recall?
We didn't do near enough, you know, because we had people stop us from doing it. I mean, I was in Cuba. Let me tell you, I was at
Can I challenge on one important point about expertise? Let me give you a concrete example. In early '79, I was Secretary of State for Energy with an interest in oil, and I was reading the telegrams from our ambassador in Tehran, telling what a marvellous man the Shah was.
Who was he? You remember?
Anthony Parsons.
Yeah.
I was then meeting, at all my public meetings, Iranian students who were telling me what was really going on. Callaghan said, I think as your energy minister with this interest, you ought to get the American intelligence report. So they sent the chief of the intelligence to see me, and he said, will you sign this bit of paper? So I said, what's that? Well, he said that you'll only ever reveal what you discover here with the approval, because it's American intelligence, of a security officer. I said, I'm not signing a bit of paper that commits me to obey a civil servant, so I never signed a bit of paper. And he went away much discouraged. But the important thing was I knew more by listening to the Iranians who kept petitioning me than I did from the ambassador, and I would ever have learned from American intelligence.
Did you see the report in the end?
No, I never saw them. I said,
Tony Parsons.
well, Parsons just didn't know what was going on. He was what you'd call an expert, and he hadn't the slightest idea what was going on.
You mean he didn't tell you?
Well, I read all his telegrams, because as a cabinet minister I got all the telegrams.
Some of them you didn't read.
Well, I dare say there were, but I mean, that's not the point. The point was that I knew what was going to happen. I'd been in Iran and seen the Shah anyway. I knew what was going to happen from students and from my knowledge outside the expert circle than I could ever have known from this marvellous experts who were telling me all the time the Shah was going to win, he was a great guy. And of course I know why, because the American and British intelligence put the Shah on the throne. They got rid of
We had the same
Mossadegh.
view that you had, and the whole American and British intelligence community knew damn well the Shah couldn't last. The question was how to get off the hook.
Well, then why did they mislead ministers?
Because they misled some ministers.
Rule by a mad mullah.
Oh, well, some of them were, of course, of bad order. But the point is the information about what was going to happen in the short run. That was the point.
I have a health farm. And I had the Shah's brother, Prince's man. I had them all staying with me.
Can I?
So we got it at first hand.
Please. I mean, all your stories are very interesting, but we're losing, I think, some of the sort of greater moral question that we possibly should be discussing. And something, a little aside you made before that worried me tremendously was when you said an Official Secrets Act is just to safeguard the cock-ups that governments make.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that what everyone here thinks? Is that what you think, Lord Dacre? No. What do you think it is?
I certainly don't think that.
Well, I think that an Official Secrets Act, it may be partly to protect the secret services, I mean to protect the interests of the secret services, but if we have secret services at all, we must protect their secrecy. And we want them to be efficient. All I want from the Secret Service is that it should be efficient, that it should be responsible, and that it should be accountable.
Which is what you're saying.
Oh,
Lord Dacre,
who
do you think you should?
We're all agreeing.
We're
just disagreeing about the ways of achieving
it.
Which
The state will have to appoint a person or
yes,
some
that's
people.
what I've said.
Who should they be?
Well, that's what I've said. I've argued for the argument I advance is a group of privy councillors who would be trusted by everybody, so that the Prime Minister can say in the House of Commons, this is a security matter which we don't discuss on the floor of the House, but it has been approved by this body, which would then be respected.
Which was appointed by the government?
No, not necessarily.
By whom?
Well,
by the House?
It can be appointed by the House, it can be approved by the House, it can be appointed by differing constituencies. I mean, we can decide how it's going to be constructed if the principle is accepted.
I agree entirely with the principle, but I'd like to know how the people get appointed.
As a former serving officer, who would you trust? Who would you go to? Who would you be happy with?
I don't know. Because the old boy network being what it is in this country, and intelligence services being a sort of Freemasonry anyway, I believe you can always get, whether it be a High Court judge or whoever, you can always get to him and say, remember Charlie, so-and-so, and so-and-so, and by the way, it would not be in the interest for this thing to go this way or that way.
So what's your solution?
I was told.
Well, we have to do what Lord Dacre says, but I'm concerned about how we find the people
Yes.
who are acceptable.
But could I ask you, Lord Dacre, a practical
Can I
question
just
about Suez?
ask this point?
Now, Suez was claimed by the government of the day, and I'm not making a party point, was claimed by the government of the day to be in response to an Israeli attack, and there was a lot of suspicion of collusion. This was denied. Lord Hailsham was a member of the Cabinet in the House of Lords, as I read his speech the other day, said that it had been for that reason. Subsequently, it's come out it was collusion. Now, it was very, very secret that it was collusion because we wanted to win the war, but the collusion was a crime to cover an act of aggression. Now, you saying that you could, I'm sure you could get, as Mr. Cavendish said, you could get lots of privy councillors to cover up for you because there are endless number of people queuing up for a peerage or whatever it is, and they earn it by covering up. But there are important questions here. The war was a war that was designed to reoccupy the canal, rather like what the Americans are about to do in Panama.
It's much worse than
well,
a
just
crime.
just a second, Mr. Copeland. I'm asking you, how do you deal with collusion, which was a crime against international law and the Charter, by having privy councillors who would, as it were, deal with it? It's a political question.
I'm entirely in favour of the Suez operation.
Ah, well, that's fair enough. That was an act of
Well,
aggression.
well,
That's straightforward.
Dacre,
And why didn't you let it be
What
known
about
that it was
illegality in general, the general principle?
collusion? I'm sorry.
What I'm...
Lord Dacre just answer the general point.
that it was an act of state, which was legitimate if it had been successful. I was against it at the time because I didn't think it could work, because once you've occupied the canal, you've got to govern the whole of Egypt too, and how you kick out Nasser, and how are you going to reoccupy the whole of Egypt and have the expense of running it? I didn't think it was workable. But as an operation, it was an act of state. All states have to take acts of state periodically. I see nothing immoral in it.
It just happened to be a breach of our obligations to the Charter. The public won't tell the truth.
To move us on to a slightly different subject, was Gibraltar and what happened in Gibraltar, was that an act of state, do you think?
Yes. And I think it's very interesting to know, you see.
When you say what happened in Gibraltar?
Well, the killing of the three.
Explain the background to it.
My understanding of what happened at Gibraltar was that the SAS was sent in and they killed these people, and it now emerges that the Spanish police had told them they weren't armed and so on. But if somebody tried to bring a murder charge against the SAS, their answer would be it was on orders. Who gave them the orders? It was under the prerogative. Now, the prerogative is exempt entirely from any question of legal question. It would be rather like trying to sue a hangman for executing somebody. It would be judicial execution, and in this case under the prerogative. Now, of course, what Lord Dacre would say is killing those three people was an act of state. And
Absolutely legitimate.
Well, legitimate, but the fact is that people are not allowed to know the truth. And the Sinn Féin, who might have a different view about what happened, would not be allowed to broadcast.
To come in very vehemently here, because I agree with you. I think it was a legitimate act. What appalled me as a reporter trying to write about it was the incredible amount of obfuscation that happened at the time. I mean, the amount of time it was before we found out that there was no bomb. I mean, I've got quite an interesting anecdote about this, because I was in the office when we first heard the news. 3 shot, and there was a bomb in the car. That is the reason for it. Fine, it's a very nice little package. I can't quite remember what the time span was, but I know that we had several hours later, Sir Geoffrey Howe telling the House of Commons, there is still a bomb. And then the head of public relations for the army was happened to be visiting the Daily Telegraph. And I think this was Monday, the Monday after the shootings. And he made a check call back to his office on a telephone that was just next to my desk. And I remember him putting that phone down and turning to me, pretty ashen, and saying, "There's no bomb, Adela. You've heard that half an hour before any of the other papers have heard it." I just happened to be there, and this was going to come out very soon. That horrified me. The amount of time it was before we were told that.
Well, they lied in defence of an act of state that was a breach of the law of the land, and anyone who now knows that would be guilty of an offence if they told the true story.
A legitimate breach of the law. There's an area.
A legitimate breach of the law means that there is this imaginary... the Queen didn't
to exercise
to
the
kill
difference as you see it.
Well, the difference as I see it is this, that there are... the secret services should operate within the law. General rule, I agree. But salus populi suprema lex. the duty of the Secret Service, of the Security Service, is to protect salus populi, the safety of the people. And that comes first. And therefore, supposing an airliner containing 260 people is going to be exploded in midair, and there is no time to go through the legal procedures, and it's too late, the thing is taken, then action must be taken. And if action includes shooting some people, they must be shot. I see absolutely no objection to that.
But they should then have the courage to stand up and say, this is what we did, this is how we did it, judge us on that. Not judge us on something else.
Right, absolutely
I agree wholeheartedly with you. But I say if you do something, you take the consequence of your actions.
That's half the problem, that so many things happen which can be defended, but in fact lies are told initially, and then the truth gradually trickles out.
That strikes me as governmental cowardice.
Well, it isn't a question of cowardice.
No. It's far greater.
It's incompetence.
No, it isn't incompetence.
Well, it's incompetence that shouldn't happen. I mean, we're talking about killing people, murdering them, whichever term you happen to choose.
It stems from something more important. It stems from Henry II. Who will rid me of this turbulent priest? And so they go and do it. And then afterwards they say, oh, I didn't actually mean that. Yeah, and then they all, it's like the green Rainbow Warrior. I don't suppose Francois Mitterrand actually said, go out and blow up the Rainbow Warrior. What he said was, who will rid me of this turbulent ship? And so, can I just finish? And he allowed his people to go out and blow them up and kill a Portuguese cameraman. And then, of course, he said, then he got Bernard Tricot to write one of these ludicrous reports, rather like Lord Bridge does on telephone tapping, which isn't worth the paper it's printed on. And he then tried to duck the issue. The only difference between Gibraltar and the Rainbow Warrior was that the French eventually did have the courage to say, well, yeah, we did do it, and they are heroes, and we'll blackmail New Zealand through the common market. And it was noticeable that both America and Britain, who are always so keen that the world must stick together on terrorism and must condemn terrorism, didn't say a word about the bombing of the Rainbow Warrior, presumably because they were anti-nuclear. And they allowed the two terrorists to be freed from prison, and now, of course, they've gone back to France. A piece of state-controlled terrorism. Was that right, Lord Dacre?
I have to think of that.
Covered by lying. Because you see that we have to bring somewhere into this argument whether there is an obligation to speak the truth. And these acts of state... Oh, well, if you say that, come on, this is...
Let's press Lord Dacre a little further. Let's press Lord Dacre a little further on the Rainbow Warrior. I mean, it seemed to me you were in something of a dilemma. There was a...
I've rather forgotten the detail.
Well, there was only one man killed. Perhaps it wasn't very important. If 80 men have been killed, perhaps it would have been... Or perhaps if it was a soldier in Northern Ireland had been killed, that's more important than the Portuguese cameraman, perhaps. So there's a slight difference in morality, is there?
Mr. Ben, have the Secret Services ever tried any kind of physical action against you? I don't mean necessarily your person, but your property or whatever.
No, I don't think the personal story is very interesting here because I'm able to defend myself by being on the programme and making speeches and so on. But of course I do have endless examples of people who come to me or have been brought to my attention. I remember one case. A Conservative Member of Parliament drew to my attention when I was Industry Secretary that one of his constituents couldn't get into the civil service. So I asked for the report, and I was given it. And the report was her father read the Morning Star. Now, that was one example. Another occasion, I wanted to appoint Lord Mr. Scanlon to the Gas Board, and I was told you had to have people loyal to the country, as if somehow he'd revealed to the Russians where the pipelines lay. And the chairman of the Gas Board suggested instead one of those duchesses, I can't remember which, who he said was known to be very conscientious with her paperwork. And I think you have to have a bit of laughter, because, you see, it is partly class. That's why so many spies have got away with it. Blunt was from the upper classes, and he was a friend of the Queen. There was a case, as far as I remember, of one of the garden girls who type at number 10, who revealed information, if I remember rightly, to the South Africans. But if you're working class or socialist or trade unionist, there's a presumption of subversion. If you come from the right school, you're protected. And the Blunt case is probably the most remarkable of all, dealt with in Paul Foot's book. And not that I have any personal feeling about people who do things on moral grounds, because in the end you have to test people whether they do it out of principle. But having said that, the securities tends to be based on class. That's no doubt why they approached me. They thought your father was a former Secretary of State. He might be good for the Security Service. And I said, I want to go into Parliament. Well, they said, that doesn't matter. So quite happy to recruit a Member of Parliament, which is a breach, I might add, of the rule that you can't have an office of profit under the Crown, which is a basic principle. They didn't bother about that. And I think there are Members of Parliament, I've always thought that, who worked for the Security Services when they pretended to be MPs. Isn't that, or was that an act of state?
I don't think it's an act of state.
To break the law about an office of profit under the Crown, how would you justify that?
Yeah,
You mean financial profit?
Yes, if you have a job. If I were appointed chairman of the gas board tomorrow, I'd have to resign my seat. That's what's meant by an office of profit. It means you're employed by the government when, as a member of Parliament, you're supposed to be a member of the legislature. That's a funny but important British principle. And that's the only way you can resign from Parliament is by being made bailiff of the Chiltern Hundreds, which is a non-existent job, but it's held to be an office of profit, so your seat is vacated and there's a by-election. That's the explanation for those who don't understand.
Can I just ask you this? I know it's a small detail, and I know you're not, Mr. Benn, entirely keen to talk about it, but I'm just fascinated. How does an approach from the security services actually happen?
My old public school headmaster came to me and said, this confirms class, because I was at a public school, so and the son of a peer, must have been an absolute candidate. And he said, would you be interested in a job? Well, I just left college, so I said, well, what sort of a job? So he said, well, I'll introduce you to somebody. And a man came to see me whose name I never knew, I only discovered later. Turned out to be Colonel Sheridan, who set up IRD.
The name would have been different.
Well, maybe it was. And I said, what is it? Well, he said, it's difficult to explain. So I had a word with my dad. He said, don't touch it with a barge pole. but I said to him, I'd like to, as I mentioned, I'd like to be in Parliament. No problem about that. And they offered me a sum which was 2 or 3 times as great as I got in the BBC at £475 a year, but it was a job. Then when I got into Parliament, the same man came back and offered it me again. By this time I knew it was Colonel Sheridan. It was only when he died, it turned out I realised he'd set up IRD, which was an intelligence service. And there are other MPs, I think, in a similar position. And it doesn't worry me very much, because I must say this about the intelligence services. I think they're paper... Well, I think he said... Well, he didn't give me the details because I wouldn't take the job, rather like I never knew what was in the American telegrams about Iran, because I wouldn't sign the bit of paper.
I mean, would you plant questions in Parliament?
Oh, I don't know what it was. I mean, you probably know more about IRD than I do, but it was an intelligence service. I would have received a salary from the government and received a salary as a Member of Parliament. And I think that can't be justified as an act of state, Lord Dacre. No. Do you?
Doesn't also strike me as being a very clever thing to recruit MPs, anyway.
Oh, I think it's pretty clever. Because,
what can an MP do?
I can't see.
I suppose if you've got disinformation, you could feed it through an MP who puts down a parliamentary question.
That's more like a bit of lobbying.
Yes, but then you're bringing information out into the open.
Oh, no, disinformation.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I mean, after all, you admit there is a bit of disinformation goes on, to put it mildly, in the security service. And if you ask the Prime Minister whether she'd comment on this or that, which isn't true, then all the papers are entitled, because they can report parliamentary proceedings,
shows
to
how
give
bereft
credence.
They are of ideas of how to recruit MPs.
I agree with that. I wasn't an MP at the time.
No, but I mean, it does show, doesn't it?
Well,
I mean,
that
the state of our
does. I must
intelligence
defend my
services,
profession.
if
But I
that's the
think
best
it
that they
quite
can
handy.
do, yes, that's a shocking thought, doesn't it? That really shows how bereft of ideas, and it really reduces my confidence.
But they're paper tigers, really. You see, I mean, we joke about it, but we talk about it seriously. But actually, I'm not frightened of the intelligence services in any way at all, because I don't think they're very competent.
No,
I think they can mislead people for a short time. If I can quote Abraham Lincoln, they can deceive some of the people some of the time, or all of the people, what is it, some of the people all of the time, or all the people, but not all of the people all of the time. And I don't think they're as big a threat.
You can't fool all the people all the time, but you can give it your best shot.
Anthony Cavendish, let me draw you in here. Tony Benn was saying a few moments ago about, and indeed there was general agreement, that there is a very strong class club-type atmosphere within the Secret Services. Was that your experience? And if it was, did that have any kind of connection with the reason why your former boss, Sir Maurice Oldfield, was in recent years, his name was, in your view, blackened?
I think that the service obviously takes its image from the chief. And when you had a chief who was an old Etonian and spent most of his time in whites, which means during the war and at the end of the war, he liked to see his own sort around. But I think also when we had a Labour government after the war and Ernie Bevan was Foreign Secretary, who technically was the ultimate in charge of the service, it changed greatly. I mean, the fact that Maurice Oldfield became chief as a scholarship boy and non-Oxbridge, I think was indicative of that. I think that, as we talked about the game of cricket, it was very much looked upon perhaps as a game of cricket, and you knew who the other players were, but I would think it was entirely different now.
Do you think it's changed?
Yes.
You hope.
Well, it would have to be.
Gone back again, you mean, to the old class basis, you mean?
No, I think that it is based on capability and the ability to do jobs.
Tell me, why did you finally leave?
Because they decided I wasn't a suitable sort of person to be an intelligence officer.
Why is that?
That's what I was told.
How long were you in it?
He had a row with one of his bosses.
Yes, but the result was...
You didn't leave under a cloud, don't try to tell us.
The result was that,
you left with a very good
I don't want to
reputation.
mention names, but I fell out with a man who was a known homosexual and who had been a member of the Communist Party.
Mm-hmm. And he was in the intelligence service?
Sorry?
Sorry, he was in the intelligence service?
Yes, he was my boss.
Don't put yourself down. That's what I was saying. I mean, you're trying to make it look as though you got sacked, but you didn't. You fell out with one man there.
Well, one man is enough to get you sacked.
You could have stayed on if you wanted to.
No, but I mean, in spite of that, the two of the most senior people in the service remain my very close friends until one still is, and until Oldfield, until he died.
This chap you're talking about is long gone, though, isn't he?
Oldfield?
No, the one that you... you
No, he's still alive.
But he's out of the service.
Oh, yes. Oh, well, eventually he was sacked.
Yep.
How would you categorize someone like Michael Bettany then?
Well, he's the answer to Mr. Benn's question. I mean, a non-public school Oxbridge fellow who was taken in, although it might be fair to say, I once used an expression which has haunted me for ages. It started when someone asked me to describe the difference between a banker and a merchant banker, and I said, well, it's rather like MI5 and MI6. One is usually the social and intellectual superior of the other, and I'll leave you to guess which was which.
Anthony, the book that you wrote, I believe, is largely injuncted. I mean, there are questions over whether two-thirds of it is...
Two-thirds of it is uninjuncted in this country, but all of it is injuncted in Scotland.
Yes, it's a complex issue. Bearing in mind those injunctions, obviously, since they apply to this programme as much as to anything else, is there anything that you can tell us about the background to the Maurice Oldfield affair, and perhaps just explain to us in broad terms why you feel he was, shall we say, hard done by?
I think he ruffled a lot of feathers in Ireland from the time that he became deputy chief until he was appointed as security coordinator. Oldfield was a very different man. He was a historian, as Lord Dacre knows.
He was appointed in Northern Ireland, in effect, after he'd retired from MI6.
But he was a medievalist. He had contemplated joining the Roman Catholic Church. He could argue Catholicism with any priest in Ireland. He was the first man, I think, who went to Ireland with a great deal of influence, who had sympathy for the Catholics, which, of course, drove the Orange people and the right-wingers and the intelligence people working with them balmy. I mean, here was a chap with immense power who really had sympathy for the Catholics. I think it was something that they couldn't accept, and they said, right, well, I mean, like Ted Heath, he's an obvious one. He's not married, he must be queer. And then there were the most ridiculous stories that came afterwards, that he was flying in renter-boys, and many of which stories were investigated by Robert Parker in Channel 4 and proved to be utterly ridiculous.
Why then, and how did it come to pass that Mrs. Thatcher said in the House of Commons that Maurice Oldfield was, in fact, homosexual and was a security risk?
I don't think she said I think she said he had been, and he had admitted to being when he was a student.
Yeah.
When the positive vetting system arrived, I've discussed with other people what probably happened, but his boss at the time, who had been my boss in the army, probably said, "Oh, Morris, we've got this bloody silly form to fill in here. It says this, that, and the other. Homosexual, no, no, no." And it started as not an admission. And obviously, as other vetting forms came to him, and when he was vetted, he continued to say no, he wasn't, which he wasn't. He had some homosexual experiences as a student.
So, could I ask you one question, because you've touched on something we haven't dealt with? The way in which, within the security services, the rivalries that occur lead to one group blackening another group. That's one aspect which you've touched on, because you say, Oldfield, I know nothing of the case except what I've read, that he was actually blackened by people who didn't like him. Now, the second question, which I think we should also touch on, is the political arguments within the security services. I mean, I have a feeling the American Heritage Foundation and the extreme right has got a grip of a part of the security, but there are what I would call decent and more liberally minded security people who don't like this way of operating. Now, from your inside knowledge, could you comment on these two things that I've said about rows within and also political discussions that must take place between people who, after all, in a sense, are discussing politics, because that's what security is about?
Well, I can't talk about rows within because I wasn't within since 1953.
Well.
In those days, the obvious enemy was the Soviet Union. Therefore, if you were recruiting people, you would tend to recruit people who were not leftists, because you'd be sure of them, or you thought you'd be sure of them.
Now, but what about the political discussions that go on about whether we're really here to down what I suppose I would think of as progressive people?
When I first heard about that in the right business,
yeah,
I was shattered, and I couldn't believe it. And it wasn't until I met Colin Wallace, and he told me that he had actually been instructed to blacken people, including us, and Morris Oldfield, that I really sat up and thought, well, yeah, this is scandalous. But I mean, I would not have believed it.
But you do believe it did happen?
I do. I believe it now.
Yeah,
because I believe in Colin Wallace.
Yes. Well, that's what Foot's book's about, and I'm glad.
Tell us briefly the background to Colin Wallace.
Colin Wallace was a very clever Ulsterman who, as an army officer, a serving officer, was put into a job of black propaganda called psychological warfare.
Psyops.
And various other things, all examined in that book carefully. He was asked to do various things which would blacken the Labour government, whether it was trying to cause a strike in Northern Ireland, producing forged documents showing, I think it was Ted Short, wasn't it, that was supposed to get money in Switzerland. The sort of black propaganda things we did during the war. And he objected to doing them and was fired. Then he started talking about them, and a friend of his lost his life, was obviously murdered. That book explains in great detail various reasons why it couldn't have been Colin Wallace, but he was in fact tried and sentenced to manslaughter. He's still trying to clear his name.
Would you think he would be the only person involved in that type of operation? Or?
No, certainly not.
No.
He was the only one who stood up and said this is enough.
Yes.
Well, Stalker being removed must have been a similar case.
One would think so.
Where he discovered the shoot-to-kill policy existed, so they then said he had links with criminals, as far as I remember, and he was removed and attempted to discredit him. But that is a pretty serious offence against... well, basic moral law, and it could hardly be called an act of state.
It was a small group of ultra-right-wingers who were out of control.
This is MI5, right?
Yes. I mean, it doesn't mean the whole service was like that.
No, I said that. Yeah. But you see, this is where the argument about an act of state comes unstuck, because it cannot be an act of state for some security officers to try to destroy by lying and defamation and blackmail.
I think Lord Dacre will be the first to agree with
well, then how do you deal with that in terms of secrecy? If you discover that treason has been committed, why can't you write a book saying so?
Well, that's what I argue this in the House of Lords. I regard this as crime.
But can I ask you, Lord Dacre, going back to your point about your collection of privy councillors who are all very honourable men, and somebody comes to them and tells them that this type of thing is going on, do you really think that this bunch of privy councillors could go along to Curzon Street and see the Director General and say to him, we've been told these terrible stories, is it true? And the Director General said, well, gosh, no, we wouldn't do a thing like that. What would your privy councillors do then?
Well, I think they would demand evidence.
Well, he'd say there isn't any evidence, and presumably, I mean, criminals don't normally
well,
leave.
I mean, the privy councillors will have to have some power.
Well, this is it, yes.
Yes,
I mean, would
they
I'm thinking back to the time in South Australia when the government got very worried about a man called Harold Salisbury, who had been chief constable in this country for many years. And when we were making a panorama film in 1980, we interviewed him, and he was an interesting man because he went out to South Australia and founded a special branch out there with the help of special branch in this country. And the government became very disenchanted with him and wanted to have a look at his files. So an Australian judge, Supreme Court judge, ordered that all his files be opened. And when they looked at them, they found that most of them were completely wrong, false, about the wrong sort of people, and he had them destroyed. And we asked Harold Salisbury on the programme about this, and he was most upset. And he said, I can always remember his words, because he said, well, he said, if the chap doesn't like having a file kept on him, he said, that's the chap to have a file on. And it was a marvellous remark.
Good point.
And I thought then, my goodness, what sort of people there are. But you see, the difficulty is, unless you've actually got the power to go around to Mount Row and look at the MI5 computer and actually go through it and say, well, why is he on it? I don't quite see how your privy councillors are ever going to get to it.
They must have power to call for documents.
I don't frankly think that's sort of...
Well, Gerald Gardner, when he was Lord Chancellor in 1964, asked to see his file. He said, I'm Lord Chancellor, I want to see my file. They wouldn't let him see it. And he was the Lord Chancellor. I mean, you couldn't have a higher privy councillor than he. Well, so that I don't think you would. Now, as far as I remember, Don Dunstan, who was the Prime Minister of South Australia, was subsequently discredited and left office. I met him when he came to London, before, when he was still Prime Minister. But I think, and Salisbury, as far as I remember, because I watched the programme and I read Don Dunstan's book, Salisbury said, I'm not responsible to you as Prime Minister, I'm responsible to the Crown. So the Crown keeps popping up.
Yes, very
and
convenient.
anyone, I hear the Queen told Salisbury to deny to his Prime Minister knowledge about his special branch file, does raise the constitutional question. What is the Crown? To whom do you owe loyalty? And it looks to me as if you owe loyalty to a service which operates in secret, includes some people on the extreme right, some of whom are quite unsuitable, and until we open it up and look at this Pandora's box, we're not really going to know whether it's defending us or controlling us. I suspect it's controlling us.
Well, that's why they don't want it opened
Well,
up.
of course. I mean,
But how would you accept this as a scenario? Supposing you had your three privy councillors and something emerges which they want to know about. First of all, we have said that where there have been problems, there have been certain officers within. The boss of the various organisations, in this particular case, didn't know, so you can say, well, he should have known, but I mean, he wouldn't know. The privy councillors would come to him or send for him, and he would come and they'd say, there's this dreadful business about you saying this, that, and the other about Tony Benn. He says, I will find out about it. He will then come back to the privy councillors and say, what you say is true. However, it would not be in the national interest to disclose it. And the privy councillors then are faced with, are we interested in the national interest, or how are we going to get round this?
And the short answer is the Privy Councillors would then be bound by a lifelong confidentiality to the Crown not to reveal that they discovered that skullduggery had occurred. I mean,
in the name of the Crown.
In the name of the Crown. And the courts would say the same. So that, I mean, it's a circularity of argument, because we have come back to this first question. In a democracy, are all the functions of the state to be accountable, or some to be left to those who are pursuing their own campaigns with their own political prejudices, which everyone's entitled to, or not? And I think that is the core of the matter. And of course it would be possible to open things up. I have a feeling if you did ask for an embarrassing file, it would disappear like the log of the Conqueror, which sunk the Belgrano.
Had the Director General of MI5 been aware when the things that Wright was doing, or claims he and others were doing, or others were doing, happened, I'm certain he would have stopped them. The point is, he didn't know. And all this came out years afterwards, when had the chief had his finger on the pulse at the time, he could have stopped them.
If he wanted to.
He didn't know, though, Mr. Cavendish, surely. I mean, for example, one department in MI5, A1A, Technical Operations, does nothing but burgle and break into houses. Now, that must be quite a large organisation. In fact, Wright describes one man who has a sort of cellar full of keys, which he keeps of hotel rooms and houses, and they've accumulated these over the years. If the Director General or Deputy Director General doesn't know that he has a department that spends his time burgling houses, it does seem very strange.
No, but you have no objection to him burgling the hotel room of a Russian trade delegate. I mean, then we come down to, are we doing our job,
6 times?
Or are we investigating the local populace?
Well, exactly, but I mean, if he knows it exists, it comes back to what Adela said earlier. If he's prepared to say, yes, we do burgle the offices of the Russian spy, but that doesn't necessarily mean it gives him the right to burgle houses left, right.
No, but we're judging by the right thing. We're assuming he didn't know.
Well, he doesn't.
But he did then.
No. If you read Peter Wright, he says, we bugged and burgled our way around London while bowler-hatted civil servants turned the other way.
Yes, well, that was an illegality, perhaps. But there is in Wright's book, of course, we have to remember that Wright's book was not written by Wright, and we don't know. I'm told that the original, which was written and dictated by Wright, was far more paranoid than the book itself, which was written by a journalist and was attuned to the market. But anyway, in that book, Wright describes how he went to Hollis, who was then chief of Director General of MI5, and demanded the right to burgle his deputy, because at this time Wright had decided that the deputy Director General was the Russian spy. And Hollis says, I'm not going to ask the Home Secretary for authority to burgle my deputy, and sent him away. Of course, he should have sacked him. That seems to me the error. But then, of course, Hollis, Wright decided that Hollis must be the spy there. That's how it arose. But
one of the intriguing questions that Lord Bridge never says in his report on telephone tapping is how many applications for telephone tapping warrants are ever turned down. And it's something that isn't mentioned in the book.
Actually, I asked about this because I was Postmaster General, you see, and therefore I had certain responsibilities. The fact is that they differentiate between what they call interceptions and listening in. They can listen in without a warrant.
Oh, yes.
And if you read Lord Whitelaw's directive, which I rather think is based on one by Merlin Rees, but I may be wrong, and I don't want to do the man injustice, you have to get a warrant to do a full-scale interception. Yes. But you can listen to anybody's phone without a warrant.
Oh,
and this whole warrant business is an absolute falsity.
What's the difference then?
Well, there's no difference. I mean, the fact is, all I'm saying, well, there is no definition. I mean, you can listen in, and indeed, I know from people in the Telecommunications Union of who's listened to, and during a strike, everybody's listened to because they want to know when there's going to be a picket. You're not telling me that the Home Secretary signs warrants, Labour Home Secretaries, and about trade unionists. But I must say this, because we haven't mentioned this either. Labour Prime Ministers have arranged for the bugging of trade unionists during the Siemens strike in '66, when Wilson said there was a group of politically motivated men, which I thought he was.
Well, actually had Paul Einzig's telephone tapped back in 1945.
Of course, and as far as I remember, Lloyd George had Asquith's phone bugged in the First World War. But you see, the interception that goes on there, I tell you what I think the control, as Goethe says, have over ministers is, that if a minister who has been responsible were ever to say, they would then reveal all they knew about him. And there is a lot of blackmailing in this. I think the security services keep something on everybody and only use it when they need to.
But
Isn't that true?
On this phone tapping, I mean, there are two very distinct categories. There are people who are suspected of espionage, be they foreigners or be they Brits, and there's phone tapping for political reasons, which you're against.
But I mean, you would agree that there's no warrant for political phone tapping?
I don't know.
Well, you wouldn't think there was, given the scale.
No, I mean, well, one wouldn't think one would be granted.
Well, I think...
Let me move us on a little, if I may. I mean, I think we're probably now moving towards the climax of this excellent discussion. It's another way of putting it. I'd like to move back to Miles Copeland for a moment, because I mean, there's a question which is in my mind that even in America, where it seems that there is a greater freedom of information, and for example, an enormous amount of information has come out about the so-called Iran-Gate scandal and so on and so forth, that even there, the ability to take that scandal one stage further and, for example, to find out the precise involvement of President Bush is something which it seems the American press have been able to do. They've been unable to push on further. Now, of course, it may be that George Bush has absolutely no involvement in Iran. But I mean, is that your view, or is there some reason?
We'd be here until midnight if we really would get to, I mean, tomorrow midnight. The fact is that the Gorbachev and Khashoggi are both good friends of mine.
Are both what?
Both of them, yeah, I know them.
Are both what?
Good friends of mine. In fact, I knew about this in the early thing when Adnan Khashoggi produced Gorbachev and he explained the situation in Iran. This was then turned over, and Gorbachev went back to the States, and he did something that he's the only Iranian in history to flunk the lie detector test, which you imagine what a good impression that made. And he at least knew the difference between lie and truth, which is rare among that society whence he came. But as he originally explained and has gone over by very competent Farsi-speaking CIA people who knew Iran very well, they put together a rationale which made perfect sense to me as it was explained to me. I was not privy. I mean, Bill Casey did not see fit to confide in me everything that he had learned in his office. Also, the case that they saw themselves as the last time they saw it, they said that Khomeini is going to die. We should have some kind of contact with somebody there, just a contact, as long as we don't help their army or give them anything more than token amounts of arms and so forth. So that started out that way. George Bush was told about all that, and it was shown to him as a former CIA people. The CIA people came to him as sort of a father confessor, and he was told that there was this general idea that we should maintain a contact in Iran. He agreed that it should be and said, you're probably doing the right thing. He was just giving advice, and that was the end of it. But what happened is that it got in the hands of the cowboys. Colonel North is not a member of the CIA. Casey was technically the CIA, but Casey was an outsider who was brought in and put in charge of the job. He had a different mentality than all the people in the agency. And the next thing we knew, the operation was run against all the laws by not the National Security Council, that's the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and whatever, but the advisor to the National Security Council, authorized, got the money for some extraordinary purpose. Lord knows what legal justification there was for that money, and they went off on their own, and they tied it together with the Central America. I'm oversimplifying now because it's a long, long, complicated case. Indeed. But the story is that George Bush was told that some effort, the thought was being given to establishing some kind of contact with people inside the Iranian government. There were three lines, line 1, line 2, line 3, one with the super patriots, the other were the super religious people, the other were the communists and all that kind of thing. He was told, and he said, yes, it's a good idea to do it. And that was the end of it.
This
and
was the CIA idea, was it?
This is people inside the CIA.
Came from the CIA this time, not from the White House.
George Bush was a very popular, yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
no, the Iran-Gate operation, no, they didn't. CIA didn't have anything to do with the Iran-Gate operation at all. That
but the idea originally...
run in the White House, run by the White House.
This original idea of making contact with Iran came from the CIA.
No, CIA was asked, is it a good idea? And they were just asked as a matter of intelligence, was it a good thing to do? And there were political implications that these people inside the CIA who knew George Bush, the older people of the CIA, people in their late 50s.
Yes.
And but they went to George Bush and say, what do you think about this? And he says he thinks it might be a good idea. The CIA then went back and were thinking about doing something about it.
in a fairly negative way, and then the White House took it over. Colonel Arthur worked for the White House, understand. He didn't work for the CIA. You know.
I mean, tell me this: are we basically in a situation in which Irangate is continuing to tick away, rather like a time bomb under George Bush, in much the same way as Watergate ticked away for a long time as a time bomb under Nixon?
You know, I go into that in my book here, which I hope, as soon as the game comes out on June 15th, it's too late at night.
Meanwhile, summarize.
$14. I'm sending you a copy. You got a copy. Don't buy one. In any case, the fact that Irangate, if left with professionals, should have worked. And I'm sure it's going on right now. I mean, not uncovering all the dirt behind it, but the operation itself. Nobody's told me, but I'd be surprised if it's not continuing right now.
Still shipping arms to Iran?
Oh no, the amount of arms shipped to Iran was you don't know how much arms and ammunition they have in the Iraq-Iran war. At 1 hour would be used up.
You were saying that's still going on.
No, contact with the Iranians. Shipping something. I don't know what it would be, but it'd be doing something to strengthen the hand of one group versus another group and so forth. But it wouldn't be anything that would immeasurably increase the capacity of the Iranians as a monolithic unit to work against our interests. But to somehow get a foothold in Iran so that when Khomeini dies, or when any of the others die, there can be some channel opened is something that both the British and the Americans are doing, I'm reasonably sure.
So some more cakes are going out, are there?
Beg pardon?
Some more cakes.
Cakes, yeah.
That's the twin candidate for office principal.
Beg pardon?
That's the twin candidate. That's the Madame Aquino is being prepared for Iran. But you see, can I just make one point to you? Clive Ponting's written a very interesting book. He's used the American Freedom of Information Act to throw light on British politics that we would never have been allowed to discover ourselves. I mean, Watergate, if it happened in Britain, would have been covered as an act of state, I have a horrible feeling, and 3 privy councillors would say it never occurred. I do think the American system, and don't think I'm a critic because I think they're miles ahead of us in this respect, does allow the public to know more than we're allowed to know in Britain. Now, maybe we're a leaky ship, and I'm sure Adele would know that. We're a leaky ship, but basically we don't let the ordinary people know. Within the charmed circle, people know these things, but ordinary people, i.e. the voters, i.e. the population, is kept in the dark for reasons that are primarily political and are covered up as an act of state. And that is the problem to which we have one day to address ourselves, because Mr. Rushbridge is right. If this goes on, they'll get rid of the whole bloody lot, because people think they are an enemy of society, which in some respects, some of them, I think, even Mr. Cavendish admits, may be true. The ultra-right group who've got quite clear political objectives. Sorry,
No, the point I wanted to make, partly against my own profession, is that I think journalists can sometimes be part of this great club of the good and the great, because it's a tremendous boost to the ego to become part of the select few.
Especially the Telegraph.
No, but this is something I felt very much...
No, she's right.
No, when I started being a defence correspondent, and I remember arriving in my first few briefings, I had no idea what anyone was talking about. They were all there using acronyms. It was a club. And once you belonged, you thought, wow, I'm now part of this select group of people who have access to information. I'm not sure you want to open up the club, because then everyone can belong. I think it's not quite as select, it's not quite as smart. You're not quite as important. And when journalists, and I think journalists do get into that situation, that's very dangerous. We're not there to write for the good and the great. We're there to write...
They're there to sell newspapers.
That cynical French saying, there's more in common between 2 deputies, one of whom is a revolutionary, than between 2 revolutionaries, one of whom is a deputy. And I think what you're describing is the consensus at the heart of British government, peculiar to a feudal society, which agrees to differ and abuse each other for the right to govern, but actually is united in keeping the public out of their activities. And this is a more political than intelligent point, but I'm sure you would be wined and dined and told a few things in the hope of keeping you quiet, but flattering you in the process.
There was a very famous journalist who wined and dined for many years in good restaurants and made a fine living out of leaking other people's stories. And it is a very popular thing. It's one of the reasons why you hardly need an official secrets bill in this country, because you've got the politically polarized press and a lot of compliant and very easily manipulated journalists who'll do anything to grab a headline, because if they toe the line, they know they'll be fed good stories by certain defence ministries and others. I mean, a lot of journalists come up with very good stories. You see them every Sunday.
King was an MI5 man and pretended he was running a Labour newspaper.
Yes. I mean,
and the chap you're talking about eventually got into necrophilia.
That, I think, is another story. I feel as if our conversation, our discussion is drawing towards a natural conclusion. I'd like to sort of perhaps finish by going around the table and asking everybody to make a final contribution, perhaps addressing this kind of question. It seems to me that over the past few years, the spy catcher case has in some ways summed up and has been a central core case for all the kinds of issues that we've been discussing. I'd like to know if each of you, if you care to comment on it, would, in hindsight, have chased Peter Wright quite so hard, would chase him today, or whether you think that there are lessons to be learned from what happened in the spy catcher case. Dana?
I think I would have tried to avoid the element of farce that eventually developed around the Peter Wright case. The fact that the British government was made to look ridiculous. I don't quite know how I would have done that. Maybe it would have been giving up at an earlier stage and saying, we still stand by this principle. We feel it is a principle that ought to be defended. But we realise that we're not going to get anywhere. We're going to look extremely foolish. So in this particular case, we're going to stop here and maybe we're going to go back. We're going to look at our Official Secrets Act. We're going to try and reach a situation where these ridiculous situations don't arise again.
In a sense, it seems to me that's what the government did, and they've now come up with
yes,
a new
possibly. Possibly.
James?
Well, I speak with two voices because I agree entirely with Adele. I mean, if Peter Wright's book had been left, it would have been remaindered on the back shelves within 3 or 4 months. It was of really no interest at all. The government got caught in this whirlpool of litigation and ended up in the farcical situation of being the book's best salesman. Fortunately, they have succeeded in getting one of my books banned, with the result that I now have a line of publishers from Australia to New York trying to publish it. All I can say is that there are 2 people that you need today to help you to sell a book. One is the Ayatollah and the other is Mrs. Thatcher. Thank God I've got Mrs. Thatcher already, or Admiral Higgins at any rate, helping to ban my book. So to some extent, yes, so long as they go on banning books and making this fuss, they will generate a lot more people. There are, I believe, 11, I think that's Mr. Cavendish, I think 11 other intelligence officers who want to write books. Most of them are going to be extremely boring. But people are spending vast sums of money. William Morrow's just spent $300,000 for a book on George Bush at the CIA. So it goes on. They are caught in their own, enmeshed in their own nonsense. But from my point of view, I love every moment of it.
The fascination for the subject is it?
Yes, it's never ending. Why would we be here tonight?
Indeed.
I mean, this is perhaps a good example.
Miles Copeland, would you have chased Peter Wright quite so hard?
Well, let me explain this. Contrary to what Tony Benn says, the American intelligence has the greatest respect for British intelligence, so much so that in many places in the world, the local station chiefs work out deals where the British station chief furnishes the brains, the CIA furnishes the money. I mean, this has happened in several places I can name offhand if we had time. But there's one thing that I think we are ahead of the British on, and that is how we handle situations like this. When Frank Snepp wrote a book, which is more or less favorable to CIA, it was just about CIA's bungling. It wasn't not like Philip Beijing and that sort of thing. They called him in on his secrecy oath. And by the way, we have signed a secrecy oath in 1947. I signed one. It's still binding. And they called him in and saying, look, you don't make a penny out of this, Buster. And go ahead. We can't stop Simon & Schuster. We can damn sure stop you make any money out of it. And they informed Simon & Schuster, when time comes to pay royalties, to save yourself administrative trouble, just mail the check to us. And they bypassed Frank Snepp. He tried to take him to court, and they won their case, and he didn't make a penny. And that was the end of that. The book was a good book, and it would have been a bestseller anyhow. But they gave him no particular publicity. And they absolutely refused to give me any publicity, the sons of bitches. And I tried. It's not that I didn't try. Like you got Margaret Thatcher in your pocket. I happen not to have George in mine.
Well,
Anthony Cavendish, would you have chased your cousin quite so furiously?
His cousin. His cousin.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, I certainly wouldn't. I've said what I thought, that I think the whole thing was ridiculous, but it's produced a new act, and I have no quarrel with the new act until I see how it's administered.
How it affects you? Well, I mean, you
Yes, how it
think you have
affects
a
me.
good case. Yeah.
I mean, I haven't made any money out of publishing my book. It cost me £5,000, but I did it as a matter of principle. It's a principle I've stuck to. I'm commissioned to write a biography of Maurice Oldfield. When it's finished, it'll be shown, and we'll see then what happens
Shown
to the proper authorities. Back to the old system.
Eddie.
Well, I've been in front of a court 3 times on framed-up charges, and 3 times I've won. Fortunately, I had the money to fight the cases. Without the money, I probably would be doing long terms of imprisonment. I very much doubt changing the law is going to alter the disposition of people. My experience of British intelligence and the way it works, you make an enemy, and that enemy is very, very vindictive. It keeps coming out. And in my case, 3 times it's reappeared. Each time, when I fought the cases, I spent many thousands of pounds fighting them. I have received costs.
Do you feel, though, that in the case of, for example, the Spycatcher book, would you have pursued Peter Wright quite so ferociously?
Well, I personally wouldn't, but I'm quite certain other people have done, because I've experienced it.
Lord Dacre.
I don't think they should have pursued it so long. It's had this whole new act is really a reaction, and in some respects, I think, an overreaction to the Wright case. So it's had some effect. It's a historic event. But it was clear from an early stage that the government couldn't win, and I think they should have dropped it. And let the book, I agree, the book would have sold a few thousand, and that would have been the end of it.
Tony Benn.
I'm glad they pursued Peter Wright, because it triggered off this discussion, and a national discussion about the security services. I think it would be a pity if this discussion ended as a note of journalists and authors, because I'm both, as to how we can protect our works of writing. The real question is, have we not reached a point now where there's something really deeply wrong with the way security operates? And my opinion, if I may summarize it very simply, is that foreign intelligence is a defense function. We should know in annual reports who the enemy are, what the criteria are, how many people are involved and how much money is spent, and we should debate that, but not the detail. Similarly, at home, the protection against terrorism or whatever is a police function. We should know how many people are employed, how many phones are tapped, what they're tapped for, who's a subversive, and we should debate the policy. But, of course, the implementation, because it does involve sensitive matters, wouldn't necessarily come out. But until we do that, people are going to go on believing what has really emerged tonight, that there is something deeply wrong at the heart of our intelligence services, not covered by just saying it's an act of state, and that democracy requires us now to do something about that seriously, without vindictiveness or personalities or anything of that kind, because until we do that, I think we're going to slither towards a form of dictatorship which will affect journalists, on the Sinn Féin case, authors, but above all the public, who are victims of a system that is not a part of what we would regard as a reasonable democratic society.
Could I just say one thing, and that is, there was something wrong in the intelligence service. We don't know that there is today.
Because we don't know anything about it.
No, but
that's why we don't know.
There was something.
We'll know later when somebody breaks the law or dies, and I don't think you're covered by posthumous loyalty to the Crown, are you? I haven't heard of that.
We've been talking almost 3 hours here, and we wind up by agreeing, except for this little message to the brave new world that you threw in the last 3 sentences.
Miles Copeland, all I can say is that wonders never cease. Lady, gentlemen, thank you all very much indeed. I think a fascinating discussion. We started a little earlier today, and so hence we've gone on until just gone 2 o'clock. Thank you all very much indeed. I think it was a fascinating, illuminating conversation.
Are we on
indeed,
camera yet?
Not quite. But after I've said goodbye, we will be.
Can we have a transcript?
Thank you very much indeed for sticking with us, if you have done until now. Till next week, goodbye.